welcome to the C.S. Joseph podcast. I'm your host, John, and today we're going to talk about FE Critic, the ENFPs and the ESFPs Critic. Now, I wanted to start this episode with just a general point about archetypes, and if we move away from the functions for just a second and just look at the attitudes, I had this one thought that I wanted to share, and that is that other people's critic functions in general may conflict with your hero functions, regardless of compatibility, and especially if there's incompatibility. Especially when a type is UF and really doubling down on their critic function, unconscious focused, right? The critic and the hero, think about like, a dad interacting with the mother-in-law of his wife, right? Or even like the grandmother. There's a natural kind of conflict in a lot of these relationships, and especially from an archetype perspective. And I think the reason why is because the critic in some way is like hyper careful, or it imagines to itself that it's hyper careful, and the hero is not really careful. The hero is all about can do, and the critic's all about like, wow, you're going to burn down this family with your heroic effort, right? And both are kind of jaded towards each other in some ways. I think that's sort of an inborn starting point, and I don't think it has to end up being that way. But just to make the point that with FE Critic in particular, it's gonna, especially when like an ENFP is dealing with an ISFP or an INFP, there's going to be a natural kind of conflict of FE Critic looking at other people's value processes and being like, you shouldn't be heroic with that. You don't know what kind of damage you're going to do. But I think that's a useful rule of thumb to being able to interpret others' behavior and being able to expect that the critic and the hero and other people's hero functions are going to butt heads a lot, right? Or at least sometimes. So anyway, moving into FE Critic to ENFPs and to ESFPs. The conversation here is going to be a lot like the episode on TE Critic, on the ESTPs and the ENTPs. The reason why is because the cognitive reflection functions within the battleground of innocence, which is the critic and the child, those are the same functions with all the four EP types, right? It's just that for the ENFP and the ESFP, that reflection is switched in comparison to the ESTP and the ENTP, as far as which functions the critic, which functions the child. So in some ways, the episode here is going to be just sort of an inverse of that, and that's kind of a cool rule of thumb to being able to apply any principle in this science, if you want to apply it to different types, then just switch the reflections, right? Switch the emphasis. So, like I said in the other episodes, we need to understand the critic. We need to understand the inherent connection between the critic and the parent. The parent and the critic exist in orbit with each other, right? They influence each other, and this is the source, this is a source, and I think the main source of the critic's inherent kind of dismissiveness and inherent kind of almost like a skeptical arrogance towards other people. Because ENFPs and ESFPs, they have this burden. They feel like they have this burden with their FI parent to be good, to be careful, to be precise with whatever principles, with whatever standard they're using to evaluate. They have this burden to be responsible with that standard, with FI Critic, to make sure that they're responsible with their gratitude, with their appreciation, right? With their contribution, with their investment, especially, right? And they see other people, and to some extent, they're imagining or projecting it, and to some extent, I think it actually does exist, that FE Critic sees other people not investing well, right? They are critical of where other people are investing. They are critical of other people's contributions. And in a lot of ways, they're critical of other people's worth. And this is kind of one really important distinction to be able to kind of sniff out, ESFPs and ENFPs who may be kind of bad news, and that's if they really believe that they're better than other people. Because early on in life, especially, there's a good chance that they're going to exhibit behavior that's going to make you think, wow, they really seem to believe they think they're better than me or than that person. And it's the FE critic just sort of squishing someone's worth in their fist and just saying, you're not worthy. You're not as worthy as me. You haven't contributed as much as I have, right? So I think the thing that triggers ENFPs and ESFPs the most with their critic function is people who walk around assuming that they're worthy, assuming that they're better, assuming that they're, all that in a bag of chips, as they say, right? And one of the reasons for this is because with their FI parent, especially if they're mature, they don't assume their worth, right? They're responsible with their worth. They can know, where they're worthy, where they contribute the most, but they don't assume their worth, right? And if you want to get on the bad side of an EFP really quickly, it's to assume that you're great, basically. Assume that you are, basically a superior human being. And this is one way in which the EFPs and the ITJs with their FI child can really butt heads, because INTJs and ISTJs sometimes come across like they think they're that way, like, oh, I'm the best, etc. And sometimes they do believe that, but most of the time it's really just their FI child just being kind of oblivious of how their innocent kind of moral weighing out comes across to other people. So that's one thing to avoid, one thing to kind of turn the switch on of don't really assume your worth exactly in front of the EFPs. And this leads to kind of the second point about the critic and the parent and the critic, is the connection and the potential danger between responsibility and bitterness. And this is, I don't think, something we've talked about much, but there is really an inherent danger in the parent function and this parent-critic connection of really taking the responsibility for things that you're not necessarily responsible for. Because the EFPs feel like they're responsible, to be responsible with their own investment and with their own contribution, with gratitude, appreciation, etc. This responsibility, this perceived responsibility, bleeds into the critic, where they, in some ways, feel responsible for other people's contributions, for other people's investment. But of course, that's sort of too much to carry for any person, right? So, but if they really believe that it's their responsibility to regulate that, there's a high chance that they're going to become bitter in their critic function, and just sort of start to dismiss people by default and not really giving people the time of day to show the EFP who that person actually is. The FE critics are really struggle with, in some way similar to SE critic, dismissing people kind of by appearance. But it's not in the sensory appearance, but by the moral appearance, right? Like, that person doesn't seem like they, like that person seems like they care too much about themselves, or that they're reckless with their investment, etc. Right? So I just want to bring that up just as a kind of a discussion point, that this relationship between taking responsibility that's not really yours, leading to bitterness, I think is really a risk, and especially in the context of the critic function. And that's just going to, when the critic comes under the pressure of bitterness, it really just is going to accelerate them into that senile state where they live in their own world and they are not connected to reality. They aren't connected to the goodness that other people may have to contribute, right? So, like we've talked about in the other episodes, what the critic is looking for, what EFPs are looking for, the ENFP and the ESFP, is proof of effort. And it's the critic's proof of effort is within the context of whatever function they're aware of. And this in this episode, FE critic, right? So how do you prove your effort? How do you prove your effort in being moral and investing in the right things? How do you prove that to FE critic? Well, like the theme in the other episodes, it really comes down to two things. It's a humility mixed with a curiosity / willingness to learn, right? Don't assume your worth in front of EFPs, but it goes even further than this, into the realm of just principles and philosophies and approaches to doing things. FI parents go through a lot of effort to refine their process, refine their philosophy, refine the principles that lead to success, right? And when they encounter others who are not willing to have their principles challenged, it makes it really difficult for these EFPs to respect that person, right? So it's really proof of effort is, if you interact with an EFP, an ENFP, or an ESFP, one of the main ways to prove the effort to their critic is to be open to the refinement of the things that you value, because maybe the things that you value are harming your success, or the things that you prioritize, right? Because FI is all about prioritization. That may be not the best way of doing it, right? So one of the reasons that INFJs and ISFJs connect really well with these types, obviously there's the synergistic compatibility, at least emotionally, is because INFJs and ISFJs don't assume that what they value is the best, or they don't assume that they're necessarily investing in the right place. They're really open to being led into, maybe I should put my thinking here instead of here, right? And these EFPs love when INFJs and ISFJs are open, or act like a receptacle to their moral perspective of what's actually worthwhile here, right? Because the IFJ's FE parent will absorb that and then apply that to their own lives, right? So it's really a lack of, don't assume your worth, don't assume that you know best, but it's more in a philosophy perspective, of a moral perspective, of a priority perspective, rather than just knowledge, right? That's more TE critic. So you prove your effort to these types. You speak to them by not assuming that the things that you think are sacred are unchallengeable, right? Because, take the ESFPs, for example, with their shadow pole of desecration. FE critic and the critic in general is sort of this, exists as a refining process, as a kind of a desecration process for, whatever the critic, whatever particular function is in that slot, right? TE critic kind of desecrates other people's thinking and hopefully refines it. FE critic desecrates other people's values, other people's inflated sense of ego. So being open to let the FE critic refine those things and kind of live in a state of not assuming what's sacred. That's going to be a primary way in which you can connect and kind of get the respect of these FE critics, right? And like we talked about in the ENTP and ESTP TE critic lecture, the critic function is really looking at the end of the day to reconnect with that childlike sense of self, right? And the way you can supply that to FE critics, to ESFPs and ENFPs, it's almost this exact reversal on how to deal with TE critics. It's speaking to the reflection, right? Speaking to the battleground of innocence, speaking to both functions. For the EFPs, right? Their FE critic is looking to see where is a good source of investing my values into, right? So another way to say it is FE critic is looking for you to make good on their investment with their FI parent, right? So for one thing that you can say to EFPs to kind of speak to to their child through their critic, which is what they're looking for, is that your philosophy helped me succeed, or it helped me learn, right? Your investment, your philosophy, FI, right, helped me learn, right? And that's to each child. But really, the way that's interpreted is it's teaching, it's showing them that their FE critic was right to kind of see you as someone who they could invest into, and that you would make good on their investment. And the FI is all about principles. It's all about principles that lead to success and to prosperity. And then that's connected to your learning and to your achievements with the TE child, right? So that's one way to say, to speak to the critic, your philosophy, your investment, that principle, the way you help me prioritize these things, that really led me to success in this area, right? And then share with them what you learned, and share with them how their how your new sense of priorities is really making changes in your life, right? Because the critic function as a whole is looking for other people's willingness to transform. That's why it's humility plus a willingness to learn, because that leads to transformation. And it is a huge burden off of FE critics when other people are embracing their wisdom with their responsibility with their FI parents' principles, right? When people are taking stock of the investment that the EFPs have given you, and FE critics looking at that person and saying, oh, thank God that person knows the value of what they have, and they're going to make good on my investment in them, right? Because that's what EFPs are really worried about, is other people not making good on their investments, right? And if you can show them and be a steward of their investment, I think that is perhaps the single most effective way to kind of gain the respect of EFPs and the ENFP and the ESFP. So anyway, folks, tell me in the comments your experiences with FE critics, or if you are an FE critic, if you have other insights on how to deal with your critic function, please let me know down in the comments. I hope you guys enjoyed this lecture, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.